All right, before we begin with our study today, let's go to our Heavenly Father in a word of prayer. Our dear Lord, most righteous and ever-loving Heavenly Father, we'd like to thank you for this day that you blessed us with and for all the many wonderful blessings. We thank you for the time that we have to come together to study your word. We pray, Heavenly Father, you'll be with us as we go through this time of study. These things we pray in your Son's most holy name. Amen. All right, nearly forgot to record it this morning, so we're now good. Oh, my book, sorry. All right, we were picking up as far as in the lesson book on page number 27. We are starting the section of the Sermon on the Mount and the introduction and the Beatitudes. And so to look at this, we're going to be turning in our Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. Let's go to Matthew chapter 5. And we won't do a detailed study of this. We're going to walk through it like we have with most of the study and be hitting some highlights as we go through this. All right. So there are two different accounts of what we call the Sermon on the Mount. In the lesson book, he references Matthew 5 through 7, and then Luke 16, 12 through 16. It's not a full recollection of it, but there are some similarities between what Jesus says in those chapters. And the first section that we'll be looking at here, you'll see the author puts introduction and the Beatitudes, and that will come specifically from, or exclusively, from Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. So let's go ahead and take a moment and look here at this particular section. Here we have Jesus, of course. He's going up on, he sees the multitude, he goes up to a mountain, and he was seated. Of course, his disciples and everything, they come to him, and he begins by saying, the very first thing he says, "Blessed are the what? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Yeah, blessed are the poor in spirit. Theirs are the kingdom of heaven. And then he talks about, blessed are those who mourn. All right, for they shall be what? Comforted. All right, then he talks about the meek in verse 5, how they'll inherit the earth. And by the way, if you were here, that's what I mean, and you heard Sunday night's lesson, where we were looking at from Psalms chapter 37. Thank you. We found the passage that this was quoted from. And it's interesting to kind of think about the context of that in relation to what the author was talking about, and then see how Jesus used it within the course of this particular context. And we'll address that here in just a moment. Look at verse 6 then. Blessed are those who, what? Yeah, they hunger and thirst for righteousness. They will be filled. The merciful shall obtain mercy. The pure in heart, they will see God. The peacemakers, they'll be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, let's stop there for just a moment. Well, no, we got to go two more verses, and I'll tell you why. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you, say all kinds of evil against you falsely. For my sake, rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, I think it's important, and you remember what we studied when we started this class, at least after I moved here in 07?
Yeah.
Who was here? Pat and Maxine.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, Beth was here, but yeah.
Couldn't come at that time.
That's right.
And the attitude.
Yeah.
Right.
Paul Earnhardt with an H. Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
good way.
When I first moved here, I thought there might have been a relation until I actually got a good understanding of how you spell your last name. Yeah.
But isn't he related? Paul Earnhardt, isn't he related? I'm pointing right over here.
Oh, the Vincents? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He is Sister Vincent's
brother-in-law.
Brother-in-law, yeah.
Earnhardt is,
Earnhardt.
Yeah, his wife is
okay.
the Sister Marcia. Yeah, that's right. By the way, her name, interestingly enough, was Jan.
What? Marcia?
Marcia's sister's name was Jan.
Oh, so.
Okay.
Is it
We
Marcia?
thought you said.
And then the third one was Cindy.
Who would you just?
Oh, my.
I don't know her name. The Brady Bunch, you know, Marcia's. And
Yeah.
Marcia's not even here to roll her eyes at me over that one.
I'll
Okay.
vote for her.
Thanks. Anyway, so we studied this, and Brother Earnhardt did a good job of looking at it. But let me point something out here that I think is very important to understanding the whole of what we call here the Beatitudes. You'll notice the way Jesus ends this section, as far as in way it's kind of quoted and poetically stated. He says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake." Okay, kind of file that away. All right, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Then his explanation of sorts. "Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you, when they say all kinds of evil against you falsely. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven." And look at the last sentence. "For so they persecuted" who? Yeah, the prophets who were before you. My suggestion would be that within this context, everything that we read is leading up to this point right here. Okay? So if the point that Jesus is here is making is that you will be, or when you are persecuted for righteousness' sake, here are the things you need to remember. And you would be. The Jews, in part, would be the persecutors. If Jesus was to have presented this at the early stages of his teaching, it would be preparing his disciples for butting heads there with the Pharisees, and for those who would ultimately bring about Jesus' death. Okay, so kind of maybe preparing them ahead of time. If it was something that was stated maybe later on, maybe it was a reinforcement for his apostles to prepare them. When you think about his conversation with them in John 14, 15, and 16, there, you know, if they hate you, they hated me first, they hated the Father. You know, the world would rejoice when Christ suffered, and so forth and so on. So if that's kind of the ultimate point that Christ is making here, then we back up to verse 3, and some of these things begin to make a bit more sense within context. For instance, the poor in spirit, they're the ones, they will be persecuted. Okay? They're the ones who are striving to serve God. They're the ones who recognize the need to turn to God, and they do. And they will have their reward. Those who mourn, maybe those who are mourned because of the persecution that is faced, they'll be comforted. If you think again to the context of Psalms 37, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." In that context there, he was talking about how he would not close his eyes to the persecution that his people faced at the hands of other nations. Okay? And so then in the next one, verse 6 there, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." Again, it's a quality that would bring about the persecution. You're going to be filled, though. It's not going to be a worthless effort. You're going to show mercy and obtain mercy. You are going to have a pure heart, and you will be the ones to see God. You will be the ones who are the peacemakers, and you'll find, and you shall be called the sons of God. And then verse 10, "Blessed are those who are persecuted." So that could be one way of looking at that, how that his ultimate point was talking about the persecution that would come because of him, and the qualities they would need to be able to endure and to push through it would be the Beatitudes seen earlier. That's one approach. Brother Earnhardt, I think, took a little bit different approach with that, but even then, in the logic he followed, it made sense with the way he was presenting it too. And I think, if I remember correctly, it's been a while, ultimately, we're talking about a people who were opposite the Pharisees. Jesus says, unless you're what? Exceed that of the Pharisees. Righteousness, yeah. And so, kind of turning the coin over a little bit, that would be another possible point behind all this. Showing them that they had to have a quality and a characteristic that exceeded that of the Pharisees, to the point of recognizing their need for God, their reliance upon God, and walking in the appropriate God-filled manners or godly manners. Any thoughts? Any comments? Pat?
I could see the Pharisees following the letter of the law, and thinking that was enough when really God was leading them he wanted to change their hearts, to be more Christ-like, to be forgiving and not persecuting. I can't find the word I'm looking for them not to have this self-righteous attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Because they followed the law so closely. God was after changing their hearts.
That's it. Had their hearts not been blinded, or as Isaiah would say, their ears closed and their eyes closed, they would have seen Christ for who he truly was, not some violator of the Mosaical law claiming to be a deity. And that's kind of the way it appears they may have perceived him. Miss Patty, thoughts? Okay. Any thoughts or comments on that? Okay. So continuing there within this context here, let's note there in verses 13 through 16 here then.
Yeah, it's a question of it.
Sure.
It's interesting when you look at all those, it's not qualities of one, meaning we're not supposed to just be, you be poor in spirit, you be the one that mourns, you be the meek. It's their qualities that make up the Christian life.
Yeah.
Each and every one of the qualities are supposed to be in our life. You know, we can't say, well, I'm poor in spirit, I'm meek, and, you know, I'll hunger and thirst for righteousness' sake, but I'm not going to mourn. You know what I mean? It's all encompassing of our life. And so often I think and I've been guilty of that, when you teach it and everything, you compartmentalize it, say, the people who are poor in spirit, the people who mourn, you separate it out, you know, especially when you're memorizing it and everything, that you don't see the overall picture it's describing.
That's
the one
right.
who follows
Yeah.
the Lord.
This is a picture of one who follows, one who trusts, one who will rely upon, and one who recognizes his need
Yeah.
for the Lord. And that's a good point. I mean, it's like, you know, you may observe, you know, most people, and this is a rough analogy, most people have an eye. Most people have a nose. Most have one or two ears. You know, we all have multiple things that make up the one body. And I'm talking about our individual body. This should make up the disciple of Christ.
Because you can't be complete if you have one and not others. You know, you can't be a meek person but not hunger and thirst for righteousness and say
Right.
that you're pleasing to God. And I think that's where, you know, compartmentalizing it and saying, oh, you know, because we'll, just in conversation, oh, that's a meek person, or that's, you know, they seem always hungry to learn more and more and more. But if you don't, and talking personally, if you don't see all these qualities in your own personal life, then you're missing so much more.
Well, it's like we said before, you can't truly divide faith and obedience. True faith and obedience go hand in hand. Same thing for this. You can't cut this up and have individual parts. They are the makeup of the one who is following the Lord faithfully. Yeah, that's a good point. Any thoughts, Miss Maxine?
Well, I think that too, he realized if they were willing to follow him all the way from Galilee up to the mount,
Mm-hmm.
that there was some quality in each one of them.
That brought them to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you think about it in another passage, it's not Matthew's account, but he looks out upon them and he has compassion on them because they are sheep without a shepherd. You know, and so these people were following him because they had no one else to follow. You know, the Pharisees weren't providing what they really needed, and they saw it within him. And so that's a very good point, though, that too, there may be individuals within this group that maybe one of these in and of itself would ring a bell with, you know, and catch their attention and make them realize that maybe they've not been the best they could, and then that expands to interest that brings others. It's a good point. Good point. Any other thoughts?
That's Christ. All those attributes.
Well, sure.
That's
You're right.
Jesus.
You're exactly right. Yeah.
And we strive to try
Yeah.
to emulate.
All right. And ultimately, they all would prepare for the times that you'd be persecuted for righteousness' sake. You know, they would lead, prepare you for that time. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? All right, let's take a moment and look down. Let's see. Actually, we've got two questions here in this section, and let me check two things here real quick. And okay. To what class of people are the Beatitudes addressed? Okay, disciples. Any other way of wording that? Followers. Okay. Yeah. Because they did follow him to the mountain there, which would suggest then they had a some measure of interest, you know, and therefore wanted to learn and know more. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's see. Let's check and see if we had any other comments from online. We don't, so let's head back. And the second question is, each beatitude contrasts an attitude or disposition with a reward. Explain this principle. And the author here points us over in the direction of Romans chapter 11, verse 12. Well, sorry. 22, you're right about that. Let me get rid of, sometimes my mouse runs and hides. Maybe running away with the cheese. Let's see. There it is. Oh, come on, wake up. There we go. Therefore, consider the goodness and severity of God. On those who fell, he says what?
Severity.
Severity, yeah. But toward you, goodness, if you continue in his goodness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. So the author asks, each beatitude contrasts an attitude or disposition with a reward. What would be your answer to the statement, explain this principle?
Those who seek knowledge and understanding will find it.
Yeah. Those who seek this will find it. Yeah, that's exactly right. And we call it a cause and effect, but all we have to do, and you think about, it's interesting that he doesn't reference this because we will look at it in Matthew 6, but if you knock, he'll answer. If you seek, he'll find. If you ask, he'll be given to you. You know, and that's points there in that direction. All right. Okay, let's continue now. Let's come back to our text, and let's look now at verses 13 through 16. Now, you'll notice here in verses 13 through 16 that the author here is that Jesus, as he continues within this, let me bring it down here for just a second. He now addresses something a little bit different, but yet it's kind of blends together in some ways as you look at this. He makes a statement here to the people that you are the salt of the earth. Talking to the followers, talking more to his disciples, to those who find the interest. He says, you are the salt of the earth. What happens if the salt loses its flavor?
It's good for nothing.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine that salt could lose its flavor.
I read a commentary that suggested that the salt at this point was not pure like the salt that we had. It's mixed with a whole bunch of other minerals. And if you let it get wet, say, the salt will dissolve and run off, and you will have left the other minerals that would have no flavor.
Okay. That seems reasonable. Like I wonder if the Mediterranean salt would be, that might be an example. All right, so, and that's a good point. If it's not used, if it loses its flavor, in that case of point, then you wouldn't use it for seasoning. That's a good one. I read someone kind of make the point one time, if I remember correctly, that they were suggesting that this is almost an impossibility. You know, that you should never get to this point. But I think they would have understood this. Yes, that's true. I've had salt before, such as such happened, and it was worthless. So then he says, it is then good for nothing to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You know, literally, it's no longer usable.
You know, what's interesting is salts will pick up flavors. Like, you know, like if you put a garlic clove in a thing of salt, it's gonna pick up that flavor of garlic.
Really?
You know, yeah, that's
I
why.
don't cook, I don't know.
And that's why, you know, then those things will, I mean, you'll still have a salty taste to it, but you'll taste garlic in it. The same way with like even bath salts and all that. You know, if you put lavender in your salts, then, and when you add them to your bath, they're gonna smell like lavender. So it's interesting in thinking of it in reverse too, is that what you flavor your life with is what's gonna be kind of seen out in your, you know, in what you do. It can be useful, it can be not useful.
Right.
Whatever you put in.
That's an interesting point. Okay. All right, any other thoughts on that? All right, look at verse 14. He then says, you, talking to the people. Again, you are the light of the world. So we've got the salt of the earth, and now we have you are the light of the world. The city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. So two different illustrations here to kind of reference their impact on the people that would be around them. One is the salt, and notice the contrast is if it loses its flavor and needs to be thrown out, that's all it's good for. You're the light of the hill, light of the world. If you set a city upon a hill, is that city going to be hidden? Now, even back then, that's right, even back then with the torches and the oil lamps and everything, the city would not go dark. And I strongly suspect that even back then, you know, well, all they had was oil lamps. I figured there was probably somewhere in the city there was a light burning all the time, somebody. And so then he continues with this. And notice he says in verse 15, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand. Now why? Why do you put a lamp on a lampstand? Exactly, yeah. You want to be able to give light to all, and it gives light to all who are in the house. So then after using these illustrations regarding the light, he then says in verse 16, let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So if we reverse this for just a moment, okay, we're to let our light shine. We're not to put a basket over it so that it is hidden from those around us, nor are we to take that light and diminish it in such a way that it doesn't light, again, the concept around us. You have a city on the hill, and then it comes down to the household, and now he says, you are that light. But why does he says, we let our light shine for what reason? So that, what? Yeah, so they might see our good works. So if someone was to ask, what is the light to which Jesus is referring, what would be the answer? The good works. Let's think about it. He says, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. Okay?
And glorify God.
Well, that's exactly right. The ultimate goal is that when they look at your life, they see then your good works. They see that you are a follower of God, and God is the one that should get the glory for this. Because ultimately, He is the source of the individual being able to live their life in such a way that people would see this light, their good works. Well, I say the light is the good work. I'm not sure if that would be the best way of wording it, but what is made known by the light would be the good works. The light could be referenced to probably the overall attitude we've been talking about, the demeanor of following Christ, obeying Christ, and as a result, it does affect our outward actions. All right, any thoughts?
Can't deny the light either.
What's that?
I mean, you shouldn't deny the light. You should be a light and not, your actions can actually deny the light that should be in you. It's,
Yeah. Well, If you walk in darkness,
That's,
It-
but
yeah.
if you're supposed to have the light
mm-hmm,
and you deny that
Sure.
you have the light, it's very bad.
that's right. I would say if letting your light shine lets others see your good works and God receives the glory, then if we don't let our light shine, God's not going to receive the glory.
That's not following.
That
the
might be
crowd.
tantamount to denying Christ. Miss Pat.
When I add that, the light with the salt of the earth, it also tells me that we need to care for our light.
That's true.
We need to take care of the light just as we would care for the salt, because they can both go out or lose both of them.
That's
if we're
right.
not careful.
That's right. The salt could lose its flavor. We could lose our influence. We could hide the light. You know, what's even worse than hiding the light, it would be the light to be extinguished. But the end result would be the same. That's a good point. We have to take care for both. All right, any other thoughts? All right, look at the question here real quick. The author says, explain characteristics of light and salt that define influence. So, explain the characteristics of light and salt that would define influence. First off, how is salt effective when it comes to the food that we eat?
Brings out the best flavor.
Okay, it brings, the fact that it says it loses its flavor suggests that the enhancement comes from the flavor there. What about the light? How does the light relate to influence? Okay, think about the light. A light is projected. All right, the light is projected from a flashlight, from an oil lamp, and the light, depending on how you view the light, as far as the physics go and everything, the light still goes out. And not only does light go out, but what does it do when it hits surfaces? Yeah, exactly. Especially depending on the nature of the surface. That's right. Now, it doesn't bend corners, but it bounces. So if you're in a dark hallway and someone is in a room with a light on, you'll see the evidence of the light in the hallway because it's illuminating out. And so the light that he's talking about would work in the same fashion. People see the influence, they see our good works, and it becomes an influence. And ultimately, the change is made possible by God, and God then would receive the glory. All right. Any thoughts or comments?
If people cannot understand or see that you are a Christian, you are not living right.
Well, that's true.
That's the light.
That's true. They need to be able to see within your life a measure of distance from a difference from one behavioral pattern to another and recognize that you are different in that.
That's going with the crowd if you're not careful. If people cannot understand, if you're around the same people for very long and they can't tell, you're in trouble.
That's a good point. I've often thought if someone ever said he's a Christian, then
you're in trouble.
Yeah.
John with 1 Peter 2:12, trying to be a commentary on that verse.
Yeah, go ahead and read that for just a moment there, Rhonda.
Having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers,
Yeah.
they may by your good works which they observe glorify God in the day of visitation.
I wondered about that verse earlier. The problem is I was putting it in 1 Peter 4, and I couldn't find it in 1 Peter 4 in my mind. Because 1 Peter 4 talks about they make fun of you because you don't run to the same level and excess of riots. I knew it wasn't, but that's it right there. Read that one more time.
Having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. And
that does point back to the influence concept, I believe, that Christ is talking about here. It's not the only means of evangelism, and if a person says all I got to do is live a good life, then I've done all that I need to do when it comes to bringing others to Christ. That's not what Peter's saying. But the end result would be that maybe they would see and then turn back.
But if you're not honorable as a Christian, what a sad state. If if they can make that charge against you, that, you know, that's a scoundrel, that, you know, even, and, you know, we kinda hit upon that when we lived somewhere before, you know, where they're like, that man goes to your church, you know?
Yeah, that was an
And
odd moment.
it really left us feeling odd, you know, and how do you defend someone when this person is, you know, saying they've done this, this, and this, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, that's true.
So we need to make sure our conduct is honorable.
That's right. All right, any other thoughts or comments? All right, let's go ahead and let's come back to the next section there. And we're still in Matthew chapter 5. We're going to start there in verse 17. And make sure we've not missed anybody yet. And I don't see that we have. All right. One more, John. There we go. Now, in the next section here that he talks about, let's go bring that up on the screen there for everybody at home. We see this running from verse 17 all the way down to verse 48. So this is going to be a little bit more of a lengthy session here as we kind of talk about this. But I think we can do this in the time that we have remaining. All right. He tells them in verse 17 that he did not come to do not think that he came to do what?
Abolish the law.
All right, yeah, he says, do not think that I came to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. This is what we have to keep in mind with everything that we read that Jesus taught. If we ever draw the conclusion that Jesus effectively destroyed or did away with during his life an Old Testament command, then I think we've gone the wrong direction. Now, we understand the difference between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. And God is the one who said that he would establish a new covenant. And Hebrews 8 makes that point for finding fault with them. You know, he calls up Jeremiah 31, beginning there in verse 31. So if the people took what Jesus said when he was on this earth in the 3 years, and they did everything that he said, they would not be in violation of the law. Okay? He says, I did not come to destroy it, but to fulfill it. With the fulfilling of it, that would mean, therefore, there are certain things that would then be done no longer. Okay? But to say that he came to destroy it is to say that while he was on this earth, they no longer had to do whatever this passage taught. Okay? And this is important because this is what they accused him of doing. Now notice he adds to this in verse 18. He says that, I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law until all is fulfilled. It's kind of a notation. Think about maybe our apostrophe or something, you know, of that lines there. And the point is, every part of the law was very important, but would not be destroyed, but would be what? Fulfilled. Yeah. And there's a difference between the destruction of it and the fulfillment of it. The fulfillment looks for something better that is to come. The destruction says we don't need it anymore and we're going to do away with it. Okay, and so it's very important for the people to understand that. And the reason why he says this, look at what verses 19 and 20 will go on to say. He shows the importance of the law. That whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Kind of a contrast there regarding the significance at this time of the law. And of course, we're not done here with this, but any thoughts or comments? All right, now we have the comparison for just a moment. Look at the next verse, and we can come back to this here in just a second. Look at the comparison. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of whom? The scribes and the Pharisees, exactly. You will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. All right? It cannot be a coincidence that within this short time that he says shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven, shall be called greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and you'll by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, Any thoughts or comments? There's a lot deeper we could go into with what he may be talking about here. Typically in his parables, what does the kingdom of heaven refer to? The church, yeah. Yeah. Typically refers to the church. So if that's the case, this clearly is preparatory teaching, showing the people that the attitude of the Pharisees will not be the attitude that would allow one entrance into this kingdom. But if someone does have the respect for the law, even to the point though he unfortunately breaks, as it says here, one aspect of these commandments, there's still an accountability to them. The Pharisees were going beyond that. They were having their, as he will say later in chapter 15, verse 9, they're teaching for doctrine the commandments of men. That mindset would not have any submission to the law of Christ and his will, and therefore they would not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whereas one who would at least honor and try to abide by properly, they would have the mindset to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And I think that may be the point there, verse 19. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so, even that seems to be a great contrast to the self-righteousness of the Pharisees seen in the following verse. Any thoughts about that? All right, so let's go a little farther here with this one, though. So the next section within this, actually we're still within the full section through verse 48. Let's talk about, let's actually get to the heart of the matter. Remember, it's kind of like this, what he said, if you were to look at what he is saying here, and try to look into the mindset of a speaker, or not just speaker, a teacher, someone who wants to deliver and get a point across, you have to lay some preparatory teaching before doing that. For instance, if we were to outline this, we're about to hit a series of verses where he will say, you've heard it said, but I say. You've heard it said, but I say. So if someone was to stand up right off the bat and say, you've heard it said this, but I say this, that comes across kind of how? Kind of arrogant. I'm gonna do away with what you formerly believe. So it sounds like he's preparing them for this. I didn't come to do away with the law. Matter of fact, I came to fulfill it. And the law is going to be in effect until the smallest of the letters shall be fulfilled, and you need to continue in obedience to the law until that time comes. Now let's talk about some misunderstandings you've had. Could be see the approach there. Any thoughts?
Just a fuller understanding. Jesus.
Something they should have had from the beginning. See that's the thing. What Jesus is saying to them seems to be seems to be correcting the righteousness of the Pharisees. Okay, because he just alluded to that. Unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees. All right, let's give an example here of this. Verse 21. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. Well, that was part of the law of Moses. What was part of the Ten Commandments? Thou shalt not kill. And the kill there is kind of under the understanding here of murder. Now, if you accidentally killed someone's family, well, that was still considered killing. But there's provisions within the law for their family to seek retribution against you unless you made it to where? Exactly, a city of refuge, a kind of a sanctuary, if you would. And so he said, but here's this point. You've heard that you can't murder anybody. But he says, I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. Okay? In other words, you say if you murder somebody, then you're going to stand judgment for that. And by the Mosaical law, they'd have to die, forfeit their life. But I say if you're angry with your brother without a cause, then you stand in danger of that judgment. Okay? In other words, you can no longer say to yourself, well, as long as I don't harm him, I can hate him all I want. As long as I don't harm him, I can still be mean towards him, would maybe the way we might look at it. But then he continues, whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. Now, I had someone say years ago that that would be along the lines of maybe an idiot, something like that. But whoever says you fool shall be in danger of hellfire. And the idea behind this one, and when I was a kid, I heard a preacher's daughter. Oh, I thought she was going to hell. I mean, that was, something happened and she hollered at some other teenager. She said, "You fool!" And oh, she can't do that. I got to pray for her. You know, she's big trouble now. But that's not what he's talking about, the way that we would use the term fool. The idea here behind this, at least appears to be, from what I've studied, is where an individual is judging a person's worth, their soul, almost to the point of where they are stepping in to play the part of God. You know, it's a full-on, and it's not simply saying, you know, that was a foolish move, or you fool, you shouldn't have done that. Kind of like Solomon within his writings. It seems to be an extreme insult that comes from the heart to the heart, you might say. And it's interesting how he develops this. Look at verse 22. If you're angry without cause, you're in danger of the judgment, the very judgment that you would face if you killed somebody. But if you say raga, well, then you're going to have to go before the council. But if you say you fool, you'll be in danger of Gehenna. Okay. Now, during the hellfire, the Gehenna, y'all, you've heard before what that reference is, don't you? The Valley of Hinnom outside of the city of Jerusalem. It was essentially, we might call it, you know, we have a landfill. Imagine our landfill if instead of them covering things over, they burnt everything. Okay. And supposedly, according to some scholars and historians, it wouldn't be uncommon to look out over the city wall of Jerusalem and see the fires of the Valley of Hinnom burning as they burnt the refuge. And not just refuge, but carcasses and things like that. And so it is suggested that when Jesus uses the term, you know, the fires of Gehenna or hellfire, that he's using it to illustrate to them the extremity of eternal judgment, you know, with God. Maybe not necessarily suggesting that there is a spiritual well of fire that a person will spiritually burn within forever. It's always possible, okay? And we have the concept of where the quench is not thirst, the thirst is not quenched, and the case in point of the rich man Lazarus and so forth. But here is total consumption as punishment. Okay? The judgment, the council, complete death and consumption as the punishment there. Seems to be the imagery there. And building up to the point that he's saying you cannot even address someone in such a harsh and angered way. In Colossians chapter 3, Paul mentions, put off now all these anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. And it could be that the blasphemy we're talking about might be something very similar to this, you know, speaking that evil of somebody. Okay, any thoughts? Any comments? All right. So let's go a little farther here with this. Now, notice within the context here, he now says, all right, now think about what he's just addressed regarding if you you've heard that if you murder, but I say, no matter how you go and how you deal with someone else. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do?
Get it fixed.
What's that?
Get it fixed.
Get it fixed, exactly. Leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. This seems to be kind of the way to resolve the issue that he's talking about earlier. Kind of, if you think about it. If we're angry with someone, if we have a problem with an individual, or maybe we find that someone has an issue with us, we need to go and to resolve that situation before we even, as they were told, before you bring your gift to the altar, you go your way and reconcile with your brother first. Then come and offer your gift. Now, do you think there might be a reason, maybe a little deeper reason as to why this was the case?
so it doesn't get any worse. I mean, if you do it
Okay.
immediately, it's
Yeah.
easier than if you keep thinking and seething over it and making it bigger and bigger.
Bigger problem, okay.
Have we
Sure.
already had the Lord's Prayer? I'm thinking that might have been,
That will come,
I don't think that's yet, but anyway, it says to forgive your debtors
uh-huh,
as God forgives us, and that obviously you need to get that taken care of, or you can't be right with God.
that's right. Matter of fact, that is going to come up in chapter 6. Yeah. Not far, it's not far away though. Yeah, that's exactly right. Say that last part again.
Did you have to have forgiven yourself, or you have to forgive your brother and get right with your brother, or you can't be right with God.
Okay. Think about that for just a moment in relation to here. Notice the terminology, and there remember that your brother has something against you. Not suggesting, but imagining owing something to the brother.
Well, and also it says angry without a cause.
Uh-huh.
It didn't say you couldn't get angry. It said you couldn't do it without a cause.
That's right, without that just cause there. So if there's a situation where really you owe something first to your brother, in this case maybe an apology, maybe something there, it's better to have that rectified before you then give your gift to God, because you still are owing that brother something. Not quite the same thing as what Paul talks about, let no one owe anything. Let no one owe anyone anything except for love. But it's kind of that thought there, which then comes back to what you're talking about. The whole concept that he'll talk about later in regards to forgiving those who have sinned against us, just as we would want God to forgive us and be free and clear. Good point. All right, any other thoughts? All right, let's go a little farther here. In a few minutes we have remaining. He says then in verse 25, and this continuing the thought, agree with your adversary quickly while you're on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you will be thrown into prison. We seem to see here, going back to even what we were talking about, a determination to resolve problems that you have with others or they might have with you, so that you can continue to serve God. If you don't resolve these issues quickly, then they're going to escalate. In this case of point, your adversary just might throw you into prison. Kind of pointing back maybe to the idea that you owed something to them. Maybe there was an issue. We might look at verse 24, verse 23, therefore if you bring your gift to the altar, remember that your brother has something against you. Well, what is defined by that? Well, okay, he didn't say thank you when I gave him a gift. Or he was mean to me this morning, he didn't smile at me. Now, it's going to be something more significant. Something extremely significant. Something that you owe them, that really you must rectify before you can give God his gift. And you need to do this quickly, or else it'll get out of hand, and it will be unresolvable, because the resolution in this case would be in prison, and it is too late for you to make full restitution of the situation. Assuredly I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have what? Paid the last penny. So if you owe someone something, he's something to get it dealt with now. Then you can bring your gift to God. I don't think it's I might be wrong, but I think 23 flows all the way down through 26. And it's talking about the same scenario. If you find out your brother has something against you, you need to take care of that before you bring your gift to God. And all of this on the premise, you've heard it said you shall not murder, or if you do, you'll be in danger of judgment, but I say to you this. Okay. All right, any thoughts? All right, let's look a little deeper here, continuing a little bit farther. Now he says in verse 27, you have heard that it was said to those of old that you shall not do what? Commit adultery. All right. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. All right. The first one was, you've heard it said you can't murder. I'm telling you, you can't even think about it. You can't even hate them with that same hate. That seems to be, where that's building from there. Here, you cannot look after a woman to lust after her. It may not be your intention to ever touch her, but if you have the lustful desires, then that's just as wrong as if you had actually committed adultery. Now, to elaborate on that and the importance of understanding this, he says in verse 29, if your right eye causes you to sin, what do? You pluck it out and cast it from you. Now, here's the point. For it would be more profitable for you that one of your members perish, that is your eyeball, than for your whole body to be cast into hell. Okay? Now, he's not literally saying pluck out one eye, because you got two of those, But it's the point of getting control over the source of the sin within your life. In this case, the eye. The eye is the avenue whereby the body brings the imagery into, and therefore the heart does what it does. And if your right hand causes you to sin, what do? Cut it off and cast it from you. What do you think there's a significance to the right hand statement? Are most people right-handed as a general rule of thumb, genetically? You have left-handed people. What's that?
We're taking over.
The left-handers are taking over?
You see how many left-handed people when you're out, so many more.
That's true. And a lot of things, you now buy things that are designed for left-handed people. So he uses the illustration, the right hand, you cut it off if it causes you to offend. Again, here's the point. It is more profitable for you that one of your members perishes than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And so essentially what he is trying to get them to understand, and we'll come back to 31 here in just a moment, he's trying to get them to understand you've got to control what you do. So you've heard it said you can't commit adultery. Listen, you can't even think about it. And if you do, you need to get control over yourself. It's better to have control over yourself and not enter into hell than to engage in the sin, have these thoughts, and enter into hell. All right? Any thoughts? Go ahead, Ms. Phyllis.
You may have random thoughts. You may just have things that occur to you. But that's different from entertaining a thought and dwelling on it and toying with it in your mind. You know that it's a problem, you take the steps to separate yourself from it. And the idea of pulling your eye out sounds bad, but when you think about it in medical terms, when people have something, flesh-eating bacteria in their arm, you would cut that off to save your life.
Yeah.
It's really straightforward.
That's true. That is true. And to build on that, I think, let me check this here real quick. The concept of this lusting is going to be more along the lines of not the casual passing thought that you then resist and walk away from.
It's a deliberate.
A deliberate, it's going to be, let's see, here it is. The term lust means, okay, it's not the word I thought it was, but it's to set the heart upon is the idea. Covet, desire. Jealousy is the idea, or even zeal can to burn with an intensity. And sometimes the idea of jealousy kind of stems with that. But to turn upon a thing, to have a desire for, long for, to desire, to lust after, to covet. All those it's not a simple passing thought where a guy says, man, that woman's pretty, but I'm married. And it goes on its merry way. It's where the guy basically says, I want that woman, I can't have her, but I'd love to have her. Type of a longing for maybe. Any thoughts?
Pornography is where you will wind up if you're not guarding your mind and thoughts. And
Oh, yeah.
that is you're an addict then. And you've got another problem on top of that problem. I mean, it leads you down the wrong road.
Well, and statistically, all right, there's a book called Every Man's Desire that kind of talks about the whole battle there. They have a version of it for young men. They don't have a version for women. Every woman's desire, or every woman's battle, that's it, and every man's battle. Anyway, the point is, it's proven time and time again, if you start down a path of like you talk about, the pornographic viewing and everything, it does become addiction the way it affects the brain and everything, but it's one of those cases where you've always got to get a little bit more of a high. You got to go a little farther with that. And then if you're married, it does affect the way you look at your wife. And then when you're no longer happy with her, then comes the somebody else. And there have been many men who have started down the path of pornography, and they don't realize they're going down a hill without a break. They go faster and faster. Next thing they know, there's a physical engagement involved with a real individual. And it all started with that lustful thought within the mind, and the brake not applied and brought to a halt.
No control.
Which then kind of will take us into the next section a little bit, but other thoughts on that? Ms.
I don't know
Phillips?
if this directly relates to, but people will say that it's become popular to think the heart wants what it wants. So when it's something that has to do with love or romance, well, you just have to go with it. But no, you have a lot of decisions. You might feel something, but that doesn't mean you just go with it.
That phrase, the heart wants what it wants, could apply to anything. People stealing, murdering, anything. Rhonda, did you have a thought?
No.
Okay, all right, you gotta take off. Gotcha. All right, is right now,
That clock is going by mine.
yes, yeah, we got a whole hour, it's 10 o'clock.
It's like,
Just
I
started.
don't know it.
Oh, my apologies, I didn't realize
Wrong.
it's not just wrong, it's way off.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, let's go and pull it to a close. I apologize. I'll get that reset. Let's plan in 2 weeks. We'll pick up with verse 31. And we'll try then in 2 weeks to complete this next section. And then we'll talk about how much farther we're going to go with this session of our study. Appreciate all your participation and comments. Let's go ahead and we'll be dismissed in a word of prayer. Dad, would you mind doing that, sir?
Father in heaven, we're glad we had this opportunity to come together and study your word. We thank you for your word. We pray that we'll apply these principles to our lives and teach them to other people. Forgive us of our sins, as we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
You know what I did? I locked my car.
So we're gonna start Matthew 5:17.